Okay, so I was just saying that when you did the release post, I was so impressed with how smooth it went and how it felt like a lot of the messages you were sending weren't intrusive. They did a good job of being reminders, but at the same time also gentle reminders. And it seemed like it was one of the release posts that went really smoothly. Like it was done on
Well, thank you.
time, and we had some positive changes that came out of it. And so I was hoping for myself, who because I'm going to do the upcoming release post in February, if you had any pro tips or things that I should make sure that I do.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out, and I mean, thank you for saying that you enjoyed it. It's obviously a team effort, and I think this is maybe already sort of the first thing that I've learned. So the release post like process, I think it already has changed considerably since last time. So some of the things that like were challenging for me may or may not apply. But I think the first thing that I try to do is involve the other sort of release post roles relatively early on, right? So there's a marketing sort of counterpart, right? And for social, um, so the social networking and these bits, and just if you don't know who this is, I just set up sort of a quick 30-minute, hey, the release post is going to happen in 2 weeks, right? I'm the PM responsible for handling this, right? What are your challenges, and getting them sort of on board early on. And I think that helped a lot, especially when we were time crunched, because we already had established a little bit, how they prefer to work, right? Sometimes you have time zone challenges. So I remember the technical writer that I worked with was in Japan, right? So things like this, just to sort of understand, what to expect, and how to work with each other. That I think was quite helpful. Um, I think the biggest challenge that I had at the time was that the release post was like the release date was close to a weekend. So it's always the 22nd, right? So it can be on the weekend or a Monday, right? Or around that. And quite a few of the deadlines, are like 2 days before the release post, right? And if that happens to fall on the weekend, then that's not really good enough, right? So just check early, when the release post actually falls within the week, because that may determine or may require some changes for when things should be done. Luckily, the release post items are now written way in advance, usually compared to when I did it, where I think it was essentially like 2 days before the release post,
Right.
things needed to be merged, and that was just not really happening. So I spent quite a bit of time sort of trying to motivate people to do it early, but that was quite challenging. I think now this is more established that doing it late is it's going to be problematic. Yeah. Yeah, I think other than this, what I try to do is just be really like transparent in the release post channel. Sort of like I made myself a little plan, when I wanted to actually remind people to do certain things, because as you pointed out, it may be the case that some folks are not, able to make the deadline, or there are some challenges, right? And so I try to sort of encourage everyone to let me know early if there are any like issues, and so that I had an idea of what was going on. So I actually maybe I can find this again. I had I wrote a command line, like one liner, right, to essentially pull out who has submitted release post items for this release, right, and who has merged them and who hasn't merged
That's
them, to
awesome.
give sort of a little overview. I'll share that with you.
That'd be
That was
awesome.
helpful. Yeah, that's that on a high level, I suppose.
That all sounds great. I think That's really helpful. And I'm a couple of things I'm going to do for sure is set up some time with my other cohorts for the release post as soon as possible, just to make sure that we understand when the release post date is, and like if there are any time zone challenges, and just talk about our different responsibilities and challenges. And then we'll figure out a way to remind people early and often, and we'll just, communicate gently that, if you're going to miss something, just let me know, because we have to accommodate for it, or maybe someone else can jump in and help. And then maybe some command line tricks for knowing who's submitted and who hasn't.
Exactly. I think like a couple of things that I learned as well. And I think that, again, that sort of the templates are much better now. So I think that's maybe not as much of an issue anymore. So not every product manager that is working at GitLab right now may be intimately familiar with, like how to format their release post items correctly, right? Or, like maybe some of the details of how to work the system are not yet clear, because they may have been hired very recently. We grow so rapidly, right? So I think that has two effects, right? Sometimes when people do something, it may not necessarily be correct, right? And so you need to, like, I try to at least have sort of a high level overview of like some of those items, because it will mess with your sort of your build, like actually building this thing out later on. So just make sure that you understand how these things ought to look like, so that you can help out others as well if they have questions. I try to communicate. It's like, hey, if you don't know how to do this, or something is not clear, or whatever it may be, just speak up, because then you can tackle those things early, rather than like 2 hours before you need to actually finish this. All of a sudden, this one YAML file is misformatted, and or there are typos and all of those things. That helps.
That makes sense. I was thinking as you were talking, and maybe something like office hours, where you say like, hey, if you have any questions, me and the technical writer, or me and the marketing PMM will be here, and we'll be able to answer any questions or anything like that might be helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I didn't think of that, but I think that would be really helpful. Also sort of to just train people and help them out, because, I think some of the concepts may or may not be so familiar. I
know for me it was challenging in my first release post, and first couple. It was definitely a learning experience. So
so like I had exactly the same experience. So I would be supportive, or like offer support in that regard. A couple of other things that's maybe just me, but the release post template that you get for like the merge request is very verbose, right? It has many individual things that need to be done, and they are in rough order. But I would really read through it and tackle as many of the sort of little, slightly annoying tasks as early as possible. Like, you have to choose an image for the release post, right? If you do this now, right, and you get the license set up and all of those like slightly, they're not hard tasks, but they're operationally relatively expensive, right? It's like they take you maybe 20 minutes. You have the 20 minutes now, but maybe like a day before the release post, you really don't have the 20 minutes because you want to focus on something else. So I would just try to get these things out of the way as early as possible. It's only going to like save you stress and panic later on, because then you can essentially say everything that I could possibly do, right? All of these sort of busy little things, they're already taken care of. I can really focus on the content of the release post and making sure that things are okay.
That makes a lot of sense. And I really like that idea. Just get as much of that stuff done, because the more that you pile on at the end, it's going to be more and more stressful. So
a friend of mine termed essentially said, it's the opposite of procrastination. It's precrastination.
Yes.
You do all of those little things early on, so you don't have to deal with them later on.
And then you can procrastinate about other things later if you want,
Exactly. You have to choose wisely. Yeah, I think, and honestly, I think like there are already quite a few more process improvements. I know that James has done a tremendous job at automating some of the how to do certain things, how to merge all of the individual release post items, and the timelines have been updated. So I think that's all good. That makes things a lot easier. But I think like for me, I always try to remind myself we're dealing with humans, right? Which are, there's always going to be something that we thought would make it that then didn't make it for a reason, or something that actually is making it, that people didn't think it would make it. There's always going to be a little bit of this, and I think that's normal, and that's part of like organizing a large number of people asynchronously. So I wouldn't get too stressed about it, right? It's just it's going to be fine. I think that's also sort of the how I try to approach it. It's like at the end of the day, it's going to happen on the 22nd, right? And the release post will be written, and it's going to be fine.
Nice. Yeah, that's good. That's great advice. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So I think that's probably all I have. Do you have any other questions, or?
I think maybe just one, like how involved did you get with some of the content writing or things like MVP selection? Is that some of the other roles that do that?
So MVP selection, I think, is something that the product manager usually does. So I left that a little bit too late, I think. But I got lucky because there was a very clear sort of favorite, I think, in my case. I think actually having MVPs nominated early is also, that's exactly one of those tasks where if you can already do this early, right, and you've selected it, right, and people are happy with your choice, that's great. If you need to do it like a day beforehand, it's going to be a little bit more stressful.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think with in terms of like content, I think, frankly, because my release post was, like I felt there was a lot of content came in late, right? Because of how the deadlines worked at this point. I didn't get too involved with the content, other than reading it all, right? And essentially, reading for, does this make sense to me, right? Or like, is it like, I don't even know what it does. And I think this is also, that's probably one of the like more interesting editorial challenges, is like sorting, the release post in a way that is appealing, right? And I essentially, we like, there were nominations for the big features, and that was fine. But after that, I also tried to at least give an assessment from sort of my personal opinion, as in, like, what is the value to our customers, right, and our users, and grouping a little bit like that, right? That's very subjective. I think your marketing manager can help with this as well, but
and James did a good job of that, I think, in this last post too, like making sure I noticed he was going through and saying, like, for one of my posts, he's like, well, why is this valuable?
Yes.
And what was the pain point that we solved? And I think that language was maybe added to the handbook as well. But
yes.
yeah, I think having that mindset of reading through and saying that will be helpful. Yeah, I like that.
I think maybe
real mindset.
Maybe now that I think quite a few tasks are more automated, and release post items will come in a little bit more like on the early side, I think maybe you'll have more time to dedicate to actually reading the items, right, and helping a little bit, with getting the value out, and why we chose to do what we did. And I think sort of gently reminding people of that is certainly valuable, right? Because in the end, like, many people will read this who have no intimate, like, detailed knowledge of GitLab, the product, right? And if we can't explain why we did what we did, I don't think there's much value in having it in the release post.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Were there any surprises towards the end as well? Like, I feel like one thing I've seen is it looks like everything's done, and then there's another round of reviews or another round of feedback that happens, or one, or the like Sid approves it in the end, right? We send it to Sid, and then maybe
Yes.
he offers some feedback. But that's kind of, it seems like that's one of those things where that's the end of the deadline, and it's like all hands on deck, and you just make sure
Yeah.
you're communicating clearly and working to get it done. And that's where the meeting, or like being on the same page with the PMM and social marketer will help, because you can be on
Yes,
top
I,
of that
I
stuff
agree.
together.
I mean, I had a few things, like for example, the videos didn't load, right? Because of like cookies and like data protection and whatnot. And it was just like literally the videos don't load. At that point, you have to make a decision, I think sometimes, what to do, and how to address it. Or like I think for one feature, it was like promoted to a primary feature, even though it was only like thought of as a secondary feature, and then it didn't have a screenshot. And I think then a little bit of creativity and also depending on the time zone, because maybe the person who wrote this will not be online when that happens, right? They can't actually react as quickly. And I felt, especially with these like very deadline driven sort of processes, the release post will ship, right? And it will ship at a certain date. And if you have like a decision to making a decision is likely going to be more important than shipping like a primary feature without a screenshot, right? So it's like sometimes I think you just need to say
Triage a bit, yeah.
triage and say like, okay, we are going to do A, right? Because otherwise it's not going to move forward. And I think that was a little bit uncomfortable sometimes, because I'm like, you have to make a call, right?
Yeah.
But
Okay.
that happens. I wouldn't be too worried about it. It's often a little bit of common sense. And
Well, this was really helpful. Anything else to add, or I could stop recording?
I don't know. I think it was actually, for me, it was quite enjoyable. I learned a lot about different product areas, and it was an interesting process to shepherd along. And I personally, I don't know, on that personal level, I like operations, and it also is very satisfying, right? It's a very clear like product at the end of this, right? That you ship, you put your name on it, and I think that's also really fun. It's something that's very contained, right? As in, when it's going to happen, and it's going to happen, and you do it, and at the end of the day, you would say like, yeah, I shipped this release post. It's kind of cool.
I love that idea. And just remind me of that on February 21st.
I will.
But yeah,
I'll shoot you a message on Slack and just, a little bit of motivation.
I'm looking forward to it. And thank you so much for your help. This was awesome.
No problem at all. Thanks for reaching out. I hope it was useful.
Great.